viewers, this is Nimra TV and you're watching Perspectives with me, MARYAM OlUGBODE. Nigeria, Africa's biggest economy, is now its third largest debtor. That is right, despite its vast natural resources and economic potential. The country is sinking deeper into the quagmire of debt. The latest figures from the African Export-Import Bank, Bank, reveal a troubling reality. Nigeria holds 8% of the continent's total external debt. That means for every $100 Africa owes, Nigeria alone is responsible for $8. The numbers are even more alarming on the global stage. Nigeria is now the third largest debtor to the World Bank's International Development Association, IDA, with a staggering $17.1 billion in debt exposure as of September 2024. The question is, how did we get here? And what does this mean for Nigeria's future? The Sahel region of Africa, once a vast stretch of land known for its rich cultural history, is now the deadliest terrorism hotspot on the planet. A region that spans countries like Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and Chad has now become a battlefield where extremist groups, ethnic militias, and national armies fight for control. The statistics are grim. The Sahel alone accounts for more terrorism-related deaths than the rest of the world combined. It was supposed to be a high-level diplomatic meeting. Instead, it turned into one of the most tense moments in US-Ukraine relations. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky walked into the Oval Office, expecting a discussion on the military aid. What he got was a cold reality check. The meeting with Donald Trump was heated, blunt, and as Zelensky himself put it, regrettable. Days later, in a surprising shift, the Ukrainian leader is now signaling readiness for peace talks with Russia. Is this a diplomatic breakthrough, or is Ukraine running out of options? Well, this is more coming. But first, the news headlines. Nigeria ranks third amongst Africa's top 10 debtors. Sahel, the world's deadliest terror hotspot. Trudeau blasts Trump's tariffs. US could announce trade deal with Canada and Mexico on Wednesday, says Lutney. Arab leaders reject Trump's Gaza plan, approve $53 billion rescue package. Zelensky's regrettable Oval Office clash. Is Ukraine ready for peace talks? Now let's go to the news and details. Nigeria ranks third among Africa's top 10 debtors. But yes, successive Nigerian governments have relied on borrowing to finance infrastructure, social programs, and budget deficits. The justification, economic growth. The reality, a ballooning debt burden that now threatens to choke the country's financial stability. Let's break it down. Nigeria's total debt stock has soared to unprecedented levels, encompassing both domestic and external obligations. The government borrows from local sources, including banks and pension funds, to finance day-to-day expenses. Meanwhile, it also turns to foreign creditors, international financial institutions, China, and the Eurobond market to secure additional loans. But here is the problem. While debt can be a tool for development, it becomes a nightmare when a country struggles to repay. Nigeria's debt servicing costs are eaten deep into its revenues, leaving little room for essential spending on health, education, and infrastructure. In 2024 alone, over 90% of government revenue went into servicing existing debt. That is not just unsustainable, it is a ticking time bomb. Nigeria's external debt is particularly concerning because a large portion of it is owed to foreign entities. This means repayments are often made in dollars, making Nigeria highly vulnerable to exchange rate fluctuations. The naira has already suffered significant devaluation, and with the rising cost of borrowing, debt servicing has become even more expensive. The country's biggest lenders include the World Bank. Nigeria holds over $70 billion to the IDA alone, making it one of the largest borrowers. Also China. Beijing has been a major lender, financing key infrastructure projects under its Belt and Road Initiative. While these loans come with attractive interest rates, the terms often raise concerns about the debt traps. Urban markets. Nigeria has raised billions by selling bonds to international investors, but this comes with high interest rates and strict repayment obligations. This dependence on foreign lenders exposes Nigeria to risk beyond its control. A global economic downturn, rising interest rates, or geopolitical tensions could push the country further into financial distress. This creates a vicious cycle where Nigeria has to borrow more just to stay afloat, but at what cost? The more the country borrows, the less attractive it becomes to investors. Foreign direct investment (FDI) has already declined sharply as concerns over debt sustainability grow. So, what does all of this mean for ordinary Nigerians? A lot. Debt distress translates into higher taxes, rising inflation, and fewer public services. The government may be forced to cut subsidies, increase tariffs, or introduce new levies to generate revenue. Unemployment is already a major issue in Nigeria. With debt servicing taking priority, there is little room for the government to invest in job creation. Businesses struggle with high interest rates, and the cost of living keeps rising. Meanwhile, essential services like power, education, and healthcare continue to suffer from chronic underfunding. Now, the big question is, how does Nigeria break free from this cycle? Nigeria's debt crisis isn't irreversible, but it requires bold and decisive action. Here is what needs to happen. First, fiscal discipline. The government must stop excessive borrowing and focus on generating revenue through economic reforms. Wasteful spending must be cut, and corruption tackled aggressively. Also, revenue generation. Nigeria needs to diversify its revenue sources beyond oil. The tax base must be broadened and tax evasion must be dealt with. Investment in non-oil sectors like agriculture, manufacturing, and technology is crucial. So, debt restructuring. Nigeria may need to renegotiate some of its loans to secure better repayment terms. Countries like Argentina and Greece have done this in the past, and while it's not ideal, it could provide short-term relief. So, economic diversification. Over-reliance on oil exports has left Nigeria vulnerable to global shocks. The serious push towards industrialization, digital economy, and local manufacturing is necessary. Nigeria is at a critical juncture. It can either continue down the path of unsustainable debt accumulation or take the bold steps needed to regain financial stability. The choice is clear, but whether the government will act decisively remains to be seen. One thing is certain, without urgent action, the debt crisis will only deepen, and the consequences will be felt by generations to come. Moving on. To Sahel, the world's deadliest terror hotspot. The numbers paint a terrifying picture. According to the Global Terrorism Index, nearly half of all global terror-related deaths now occur in this region. In 2023, the Sahel saw over 7,800 terrorism-related fatalities, a staggering 50% of the world's total.
World focuses on terrorism in the Middle East. Violent extremist groups have expanded their ambitions and reach in Africa as well. In the Western Sahel, Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb has produced or inspired a proliferation of extremist groups that continue to destabilize the region. In the areas around Lake Chad, Boko Haram, with its origins in northeast Nigeria, has left tens of thousands of civilians dead and displaced almost 3 million people. The security vacuum in Libya and the presence of Islamic State and Al-Qaeda deepen the risks to the Sahel region.
This is more than what Afghanistan, Syria, and Iraq combined recorded in the same period. The hotspots: Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. These three nations account for over 70% of terror deaths in the Sahel. The rise in attacks is driven by a toxic mix of jihadist insurgencies, weak governance, and foreign interventions gone wrong. At the heart of the Sahel security crisis is the spread of Islamist extremist groups. Al-Qaeda's Sahel affiliate, Jamaat Ansar al-Islam wal Muslimin, JNIM, and the ISIS-backed Islamic State in the Greater Sahara, ISIS, they are leading the charge. They have mastered the art of terror, launching deadly ambushes, kidnapping civilians, and forcing entire communities to flee. In Mali, jihadists now control vast swathes of land. That's why years of French military intervention, Burkina Faso, once a relatively stable country, is now collapsing under the weight of extremist violence. In Niger, the recent military coup has only worsened the crisis, creating power vacuums that terror groups are exploiting. The international community has tried to intervene, but history is repeating itself. French troops were once stationed across the Sahel under Operation Barkhane, but after nearly a decade of fighting, they withdrew, humiliated and defeated. United Nations peacekeeping mission in Mali, USMA, was also forced out, leaving behind an even bigger security vacuum. Now, Russian mercenaries, the Wagner Group, have stepped in, striking deals with military juntas in Mali and Burkina Faso. But Wagner's presence does not stop the violence. In fact, reports of human rights abuses have skyrocketed, with civilians caught in the crossfire. For ordinary people in the Sahel, life has become a nightmare. Over 2.8 million people have been displaced by the violence. Entire villages are being wiped out by terrorist raid. Schools are shutting down. Food shortages are worsening. Burkina Faso is also experiencing one of the worst humanitarian crises. Nearly 5 million people need urgent food assistance. In Mali, terrorist roadblocks have cut off entire communities from aid. In Niger, the junta's crackdown on international organizations has only made things worse. The war seems to have moved on. While Ukraine and Gaza dominate headlines, the suffering in the Sahel goes unnoticed. Western powers are losing interest, pulling troops, and cutting aid. The African Union and ECOWAS, the regional blocs, they appear helpless, struggling to even enforce sanctions on the military juntas. So what happens next? The terror groups are growing stronger. The military regimes in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger are becoming more authoritarian. The civilians, they are left with nothing but despair. For now, the Sahel remains trapped in a deadly spiral, one that shows no sign of ending. Trudeau blasts Trump's theories. Trade wars are back, and this time the battleground is North America. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has launched a scathing attack on US President Donald Trump's latest tariffs, calling them a very dumb thing to do. The move, which also targets China and Mexico, is being widely criticized as an unnecessary escalation that could backfire on the US economy. So what is happening? Trump has imposed new tariffs on steel, aluminum, and other imports from Canada, China, and Mexico. In response, Trudeau is fighting back, vowing that Canada will retaliate with its own tariff on American goods. It is a high-stakes game, and the consequences could be severe. For years, Canada and the US have shared one of the world's strongest trade relationships. But Trump's America First policies have strained that relationship like never before.
So today, the United States launched a trade war against Canada, their closest partner and ally, their closest friend. At the same time, they're talking about working positively with Russia, appeasing Vladimir Putin, a lying, murderous dictator.
His latest tariffs, 25% on steel and 10% on aluminum, are supposedly meant to protect American industries from unfair foreign competition. But Trudeau is having none of it. At a press conference in Ottawa, he didn't hold back. Let me be clear. These tariffs are completely unjustified. They make no sense. And frankly, this is a very dumb thing to do, Trudeau said, clearly frustrated. Canadians are polite, we are reasonable, but we will not be pushed around. For Canada, this isn't just about economic policy. It is about national pride. The idea that America will slap punitive tariffs on one of its closest allies has infuriated Canadians. And Trudeau is making it clear, if Trump wants a trade war, he is going to get one. But guess what? Trudeau is not just talking, he is acting. Canada has announced retaliatory tariffs worth $35 billion targeting key US industries. The tariffs will hit American steel, aluminum, whiskey, dairy products, and even household goods like ketchup. Yes, Canada is literally targeting America's breakfast table. The Canadian government has also hinted at restricting US access to its supply of critical minerals, materials that are essential for manufacturing electronics and military equipment. That could be a real problem for Washington, which depends on Canada for key resources. And it's not just Canada. Mexico is preparing to impose its own tariffs, while China has also signaled that it won't sit back and take another economic hit from Washington. Suddenly, the US is facing trade battles on multiple fronts. The White House insists that these tariffs are necessary to protect American industries. Trump has long argued that the US has been ripped off by unfair trade deals, and he sees tariffs as a way to rebalance the scales. But economic experts are skeptical. Many argue that these tariffs could actually hurt American businesses and consumers. Here is why. First, higher prices for Americans. Tariffs make imported goods more expensive. That means businesses that rely on Canadian or Mexican materials will have to pay more. And those costs will be passed on to consumers. Second is job losses in the US. While tariffs might protect a few steel workers, they could cost jobs in industries that depend on imported materials. For example, car manufacturers and construction companies could see higher costs, leading to layoffs. Also, strained alliances. Picking a trade fight with China is one thing. Picking one with Canada and Mexico, America's biggest trade partner, is something else entirely. The tariffs could weaken relations at a time when the US need allies. So is this really a smart move? Trudeau doesn't think so, and neither do many American business leaders. The problem with tariffs is that they rarely stay one-sided. Once one country imposes them, others retaliate. That is exactly what is happening now. Canada's response is just the beginning. Mexico is preparing its own countermeasures. And China, already locked in a trade war with the US, is watching closely. If Washington keeps escalating, Beijing could impose new restrictions on American goods, eating everything from technology to agriculture. Meanwhile, the European Union has also expressed concern. Some EU leaders warn that Trump's trade policies could destabilize global markets and hurt economic growth. The financial markets are already reacting. Stocks have dropped as investors worry about the impact of a prolonged trade war. And if tensions continue to rise, the global economy could take a serious hit. So what happens next? Trudeau has made it clear, Canada will not back down. The tariffs are coming and they will hurt American industries, just as much as they hurt Canadian ones. The big question is whether Trump will consider his approach, but let's be honest. Trump rarely backs down from a fight. If anything, he might double down. The White House has already hinted at even more tariffs if countries retaliate. So, what does this mean for the average person? If you're in Canada, get ready for higher prices on some American products. If you're in the US, expect to pay more for goods that rely on Canadian materials. And if you're in Mexico, well, your government is likely preparing its own response. This isn't just about economics. It is about political power, national pride, and the future of international trade. One thing is clear, this battle is far from over. And if cooler heads don't prevail, we could be heading for an all-out trade war. The stakes high, the consequences unpredictable. But one thing is certain, Trudeau isn't afraid to stand up to Trump, and this fight is just getting started. Moving on, Trump's trade gambit. The deal with Canada and Mexico are just more tariff tactics. First, the Trump administration hit Canada and Mexico with 25% tariffs, sending shockwaves through North America's trade system. Now, Washington is hinting at a possible deal, a move that could either cool tensions or set the stage for an even bigger showdown.
Canadian Prime Minister are talking today. Our Vice President is set to visit the southern border. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick says the deals probably won't mean pausing that 25% tariff on Mexican and Canadian goods. And some businesses say they'll have to raise the prices due to those tariffs and now 20% duty on Chinese imports. Mexico's president says she plans to announce retaliatory measures by Sunday. Canada is imposing that 25% tariff on some U.S. goods right now, with plans to include even more later.
Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick just teased an announcement saying President Donald Trump might unveil a trade agreement as early as Wednesday. But don't mistake this for diplomacy. This is Trump's signature playbook. Apply pressure, then negotiate. Let's be clear, this isn't about balancing trade deficits or protecting American jobs. The tariffs are a political weapon. And the message to Canada and Mexico is simple. Give in to U.S. demands or brace for more economic pain. The U.S. wants more from its neighbors, especially when it comes to immigration enforcement and drug trafficking controls. Trump has long accused Mexico of not doing enough to stop the flow of fentanyl into the U.S. and is now lumping Canada into the mix as well. The White House also wants leverage ahead of the 2025 trade negotiations, and tariffs are the perfect tool to keep both nations on edge. But here is the problem. Canada and Mexico aren't giving in. Let's start with Canada. If Trump thought Prime Minister Justin Trudeau would roll over, he thought wrong. Trudeau didn't just cut the tariffs very dumb. He hit back with his own 25% counter tariffs on $20 billion worth of U.S. goods. Mexico, even stronger resistance. President Claudia Sheinbaum made it clear. Our country won't be bullied into a deal. Mexico is preparing its own retaliatory tariffs, targeting key American exports that will hurt U.S. industries where it matters most. The message from both nations: Washington doesn't get to dictate the rules. So who is really paying the price? For all the political posturing, it is not Trump, Trudeau or Sheinbaum who will feel the pain of these stories. It is everyday people and businesses. For US farmers, this is a disaster in the making. The US exported $83 billion in agricultural goods to Canada, Mexico, and China last year. Those exports are now at risk. Many fear this could be a repeat of the 2018 trade war, which left farmers struggling with billions in losses. For American manufacturers, the supply chain is taking a hit. The longer these tariffs last, the more expensive raw materials become, raising costs for US businesses and consumers alike. For Wall Street, the panic is real. The Dow Jones plunged 670 points. The S&P 500 took a hit, and investors are bracing for more instability if this turns into a prolonged trade war. So will there be a deal? Whitney's comments suggest something is brewing behind closed doors, but what kind of deal would Canada and Mexico accept? And more importantly, will it last? The Trump administration has a history of last-minute trade agreements that are more about political victories than long-term solutions. If a deal is coming, expect it to be heavily tilted in the US' favor, or risk falling apart just as quickly as it started. For now, North America is watching and waiting. The tariffs are in place, the negotiations are tense, and the stakes couldn't be higher. One thing is certain, this trade battle is far from over. Arab leaders reject Trump's Gaza evacuation plan, approve $53 billion rescue package. A power play is unfolding in the Middle East. Arab leaders have just delivered a resounding no to Donald Trump's so-called Gaza Recovery Plan, one that, let's be honest, sounded more like a real estate venture than a humanitarian effort. Instead, the Arab League has approved a $53 billion initiative to rebuild Gaza on its own terms. The message: Palestinians will not be forced out. This is a direct clash of visions. Trump's idea: depopulate Gaza, relocate its 2.1 million residents elsewhere, and turn the Strip into a tourist paradise. The Arab world's response: fund a massive reconstruction project that ensures Gazans can stay on their land. At the heart of this counteroffer is Egypt, a country that knows Gaza's struggles better than most. Cairo's plan is not just about rebuilding, it is about sovereignty. It includes massive infrastructure revival.
The U.S. to take over the Palestinian enclave. The plan, which will cost $53 billion, was approved at an emergency summit in Cairo. Egypt's President Abdul Fattah al-Sisi said this blueprint is also a path towards the two-state solution, which calls for a Palestinian state alongside Israel. The Arab League again reiterated they reject any displacement of Palestinians from their land.
Over 50 million tons of war debris will be cleared. Roads, schools, and hospitals will be rebuilt. Solar energy projects will be replaced in Gaza's unreliable power grid place. Economic independence. Industrial zones will be set whole. Agriculture will be revived, and trade will be reopened. So, Gaza doesn't remain an economic hostage to Israel's blockade. So, ports and airports. A new commercial port and an airport will connect Gaza to the world, bypassing the chokehold Israel has on its movement. So, a new government. Here is the big one. Hamas is being asked to step aside. Instead of the militant group, a neutral team of Palestinian technocrats will govern, paving the way for the Palestinian Authority to return. This isn't just an economic package. It is a statement, a rejection of Trump's radical proposal and an attempt to reclaim Palestinian self-determination. Not surprisingly, the responses have been split down predictable lines. Hamas has welcomed the investment, but rejected any plan that sidelines it. Will it step down for a technocratic government? Not likely. But Egypt and its backers are pushing hard. Israel has dismissed the plan, calling the PA's return to Gaza a fantasy. Israel's preference: keep Hamas weakened, keep the PA out, and maintain control. The US under Trump is furious. Washington calls the ban unrealistic and claims Gaza is uninhabitable. The White House insists the Arab League should get behind its relocation plan instead, which, let's face it, has been widely slammed as ethnic cleansing is in disguise. The UN and EU, on the other hand, are cautiously optimistic. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has backed the idea of a unified Palestinian government under the PLO, without Hamas. The EU is considering financial backing, which would tip the scales in Egypt's favor. So now it is Trump's plan versus the Arab League's vision. Let's break it down. Trump's plan: evacuate Gaza's 2.1 million people, send them to Egypt's Sinai Desert, Jordan, or Europe. Bulldoze what is left, replace it with luxury hotels and beaches, because apparently that's the best use of Palestinian land. The Arab League's plan: rebuild Gaza for Gazans, provide homes, jobs, and security without forced displacement. Ensure economic independence and governance by Palestinians, not Hamas, not Israel. So the difference, what are the differences? One plan erases Palestine from the map, the other rebuilds it. So we have a big question. Will this work? The $53 billion proposal is ambitious. That's the backing of Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. But there are roadblocks. The first is, will Hamas give up control? The group holds power in Gaza, and unless it is forced or incentivized to leave, any transition will be messy. Another is, will the PA step in? Mahmoud Abbas supports the plan, but the PA's credibility is weak. It hasn't governed Gaza since 2007, and many Palestinians distrust it. So, will Israel let this happen? So far, Israel sees any Palestinian reconstruction plan as a threat to its security strategy, one that involves keeping Gaza weak and dependent. But make no mistake, this is a turning point. The Arab world is making it clear that Gaza belongs to its people. Trump's vision of a depopulated Gaza Riviera is facing its strongest rejection yet. And if this $53 billion plan moves forward, it won't just be a win for Gaza, not just an ordinary win. It will be a challenge to every forced displacement agenda in modern history. So stay tuned. This battle is just getting started.
Your country is in big trouble.
I know.
You're not winning.
I know.
You're not winning this. You have a damn good chance of coming out okay because of us.
Mr. President, we are staying in our country, staying strong from the very beginning of the war. We've been alone.
Zelensky's regrettable Oval Office clash. Is Ukraine ready for peace talks? Let's set the scene.
Your country is in big trouble.
I know.
You're not winning.
know.
You're not winning this. You have a damn good chance of coming out okay because of us.
Mr. President, we are staying in our country, staying strong from the very beginning of the war. We've been alone, and we are thankful. I said thanks
you haven't
in
been
this
alone.
cabinet,
you
and
haven't
not
been
only
alone.
in this cabinet.
We gave you, through
I
this
said,
stupid president, $350 billion.
You voted
we gave
for
you
your
military
president.
equipment,
You
and your
voted
men
for
are
your
brave,
president.
but they had to use our military.
What about West?
If you didn't have
You
our
invited
military
me.
equipment,
You invited
if
me
you
to
didn't
speak.
have our military equipment, this war would have been over in 2 weeks.
In 3
okay?
days, I heard it from Putin. In 3 days. This is something
Maybe
new.
less.
In 2 weeks. Of course, yes.
It's going to be a very hard thing to do business like this.
Zelensky arrives in Washington, hoping to secure more U.S. military aid. Ukraine's war effort has been stretched thin, obviously, and continued American support is critical. But President Trump isn't interested in business as usual. Reports suggest he was direct, even confrontational, questioning why the U.S. should continue pouring billions into Ukraine while talks of peace remain off the table. Zelensky, caught off guard, reportedly pushed back. That is when Trump cut the meeting short. With the fallout, Zelensky left empty-handed. No new aid, no clear commitment, just a stark warning. The Ukraine needs to start thinking about a negotiated settlement. In quotes, peace talks. Hours later, the Ukrainian president called the encounter regrettable. So here is where things get interesting. Just days after this diplomatic debacle, Zelensky is now talking about peace. In a statement, he said, "None of us want an endless war. Ukraine is ready to come to the negotiating table to bring lasting peace closer." This is a dramatic shift. For the past 2 years, Kyiv has refused to even consider peace talks without Russian withdrawal. Now the tone has changed. Why? First, pressure from Washington. Trump made it clear Ukraine won't get a blank check anymore. If Kyiv wants continued US support, it may need to rethink its war strategy. Also, exhaustion on the battlefield. Ukraine's forces have been fighting a war of attrition. Manpower and ammunition shortages are real. Can Kyiv sustain this fight indefinitely? Also, public sentiment shifted. Both in Ukraine and the West, there are growing calls to seek alternatives to a never-ending conflict. But guess what? Zelensky isn't just talking peace. He is offering a deal. To mend ties with Washington, he's proposed a mineral rights agreement that would give U.S. access to Ukraine's vast deposit of rare earth minerals. These minerals, critical for tech and defense industries, could be a major bargaining chip. But will it be enough to win over Trump? Analysts say the president is less interested in economic incentives and more focused on a clear roadmap for ending the war. Zelensky's pivot toward negotiation is sending shockwaves through Europe. The EU has been one of Ukraine's strongest backers, pledging billions in military aid. But if Washington starts pulling back, can Europe afford to fill the gap? Germany and France have already started discussing contingency plans, including a potential push for their own negotiations with Moscow. NATO's position is unclear. Some members want peace talks, while others fear that any settlement could embolden Russia. So what's next? Washington has yet to officially respond to Zelensky's peace overture. Trump's team has acknowledged receiving a letter from the Ukrainian leader, but has not committed or tried to show any form of action. So is this the beginning of the end of the war? Or is Ukraine simply adjusting to a new political reality? What is clear is that the landscape is shifting. Ukraine is realizing that without unwavering Western support, the battlefield strategy may no longer be sustainable. Zelensky's next move will be critical. If serious peace talks emerge, this could be the biggest turning point in the conflict since Russia's invasion. Negotiations stall, Ukraine will find itself fighting a war with fewer and fewer allies. But for now, all eyes are on Washington and on the next words that come out of the Oval Office. Now before I go, once again the news headlines. Nigeria ranks third among Africa's top 10 dictators. Sahel, the world's deadliest terror sport. Trudeau blasts Trump's tariff. US could announce trade deals with Canada, Mexico on Wednesday, says Lutney. Arab leaders reject Trump's Gaza plan, approve $53 billion rescue package. Zelensky's regrettable Oval Office meeting. Is Ukraine ready for peace talks? Thanks for staying tuned. Once again, I'm MARYAM OLUGBODE.